Welcome to this episode of High Performance Habit and Business Building. I'm your host, Leah Fish, and I am over the moon to be talking today with Emma Matthews, the founder of Defeat Burnout. Emma, good morning.
Hey, Leah, thank you so much for having me with you today.
Although I should say good afternoon since you're in the UK, aren't you?
Yeah, I love the accent there as well. I appreciate that.
Thank you. As Emma already knows, I lived for a couple of years in London, and I really loved it. But what I find so interesting about, I have a number of British friends, and I'm being from New Jersey and being Jewish, I'm very blunt, don't have the best manners, and I feel really comfortable in London. And one of the things that we've talked about in the past is that it kind of makes sense how many people in Britain, not to overgeneralize, but burnout really makes sense kind of on an emotional level, right?
Yeah. There's so much repression normally involved with burnout, in that you're stuffing down feelings, you're not advocating for yourself, setting boundaries. You could see how there is a cultural element to that here.
Yeah. And burnout is something that I know you're so passionate about because it's something that you learned about the hard way. Give us a little bit of background or a lot about your story.
Yeah, so I guess if we go way back, I was the kid at school that was on the educational wagon of kind of following, doing qualifications, going to the best university, because that was the system that I was in. But I think I was always quite entrepreneurial at heart, and I never really had that role model that made me see having my own business was possible. So didn't really know what my passion was. So I literally just did the thing of, let's look at a league table of earnings potential from different degrees. So I ended up going to read economics at a good uni in the UK, fell into a career in banking. I had some good times. I always did the kind of sexier jobs in banking. They do exist.
Sexier jobs. I love it.
Yeah. And worked my way up, got to director level. I did a lot of work with the C-suite in a global bank. And then I took on a role in a different part of the bank and hit burnout, to me, completely unexpectedly. I didn't see it coming. Literally one day in the office, it was a Friday, I was in a meeting, the weekend was in sight, and it was literally just like a fire went off in my brain, and I was completely transported into fight or flight mode. I had what I now know was a huge panic attack in the office, and I never made it back after that, actually. Yeah, it was the point that my body just said to me, you have ignored the warning signs and the whispers we've given you for so long that we're just taking you out until you actually realize what's happened here and do something about it. So it was just complete wake-up call for me that I'd been absolutely neglecting my needs and just focusing on the job. But at that point, I was doing 20-hour days, not really eating properly, sleeping properly, but it built up so slowly over time that I hadn't even noticed.
Wow, it's incredible how, our bodies are so incredible. I was just talking today with my toddler son about, he said, how long can people not eat? And I said, actually it's drinking that, water that people can't go for a long time with. But it is amazing how our bodies, how in a way, sort of how resilient they can be in a not good way, like where, like you say, could take that long. How long do you think it was that you were having these whispers and these warnings?
Having asked myself that question a lot, I think it was building for about a year. So September 2017 was the peak of burnout for me. September 2016, I'd had a cycle crash. I was doing a charity bike race with work, came off my bike at high speed, got concussion. And then I came back to the office and they decided it was a really good time for me to move on and kind of get new opportunities. It came from a good place, but actually I was in a period where I had post-concussion syndrome and I needed some stability for a bit whilst my brain got back to working properly. So rather than a period of stability, I was moved to a part of the business that not giving too much away, there was just a lot to sort out, and I was running a function before the people were in place to support me with the work. So you can see how it happened, really, with my personality type of chuck me in the deep end, I'll come out swimming, everything will be okay. In that environment, plus the post-concussion syndrome, it was just the perfect storm. But I'd always got through everything, so I had that belief that, oh, it's just something that will sort itself out and kind of I'll come out the other side. But yeah, there was just so much stress that became chronic.
Mm. And was there any, it's interesting, it sounds like that was not one of the sexier jobs that you ended up with at that point.
No, last one, not so much.
Yeah. But did your job, I mean, working 20-hour days, was there any awareness in the workplace of, or apparently not with yourself at that time, but 20-hour days, nobody noticed that this young woman was working 20-hour days? Or they were just like, good on you?
Yeah, I think it was just one of those, there's all this work to do, there's someone here doing it, more people are going to be recruited and come in. So I think people probably thought it's moment in time, it's going to pass, but it didn't pass quickly enough for my body. But I remember when I went to see the medical professionals, like quite quickly I was in front of a psychiatrist, and he couldn't believe that I hadn't been on some form of drug to work like that for as long as I did. He said it was quite remarkable you were able to keep going for as long as you did. And I was like, interesting.
Wow. And so it seems like, just from observing you and having had a couple of chats with you, it seems like you've brought that personality of drive and determination into your new business of entrepreneurship, but you're doing things in a completely different way.
Yeah, 100%. Though I did the whole entrepreneurial burnout thing 2 years post corporate burnout. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
good. Very
2019, I got out of balance again. Some of my old habits came back. So I recognized that I needed to start creating my own environment to come out the other side of this. So I started off just freelancing, and then got really good at the area I was freelancing in, and suddenly it became a global business. And something that actually my heart wasn't in anymore. I was working across time zones, responsible for all of these sales professionals, and the warning signs came back very quickly, very loud. And I had the awareness that actually, no, I need to step away from this. Otherwise, I'm going to be back in that cycle again. And it took me a long time to come out of the first one. So it was a shame that I didn't learn the lessons soon enough for that not to happen. But equally, I think it's the thing that now enables me to do what I do, because I've experienced it as an employee, as a business owner, and finally embodied the lessons.
It's something that, I always say I teach productivity and organization because, as you know, it's something that I've struggled with, and I do struggle with occasionally. These are the things, kind of the work of our life that, even if we become really good at it, it doesn't mean that inclination or just that accident proneness to that sort of behavior isn't there. And I think that's why we're really able to be, more compassionate with the people that we work with about it, because we've lived through it, right? It's not hypothetical at all. But tell us about, getting, if you'd be okay with that, a little more specific for people, because as I said, a lot of my clients experience or don't realize that they experience burnout. Could you give us some details or some examples of the warning signs that you experienced, either the first or the second time? Were they the same? What was it like?
Yeah. And this is one of the tricky things with burnout, because early warning signs, they vary so much by different people, and quite often are associated with being about some other health issue. So to share my examples, I guess if I look back to when I burnt out in corporate, the earliest signs were I started to get a lot of stomach pains and was randomly sweating in the office, but I didn't really think too much about it. My brain progressively started to feel like cotton wool, and it was taking me more and more time to get things done. And it was almost like I just entered this cycle of, I'd start the day with a to-do list, which was nigh on impossible, but by the end of the day, it was longer than it started. And I was having to put in more and more hours to get less and less done. And I was increasingly feeling really negative. So I'd always been quite an upbeat person, saw solutions rather than problems. And I can remember getting into this cycle of thinking, this can't be what life is about. This is yeah, I was incredibly negative, which wasn't me. And I became very short-tempered as well, more so at home. The tiny bit of home life that I still had, I just had nothing to give. So I was snapping as soon as someone asked me to do anything, because I just had no capacity to do anything else. I was completely spent. So I'd say those were the ones in the corporate world. And then what I noticed when I went into the cycle for the second time was it was almost like my body went into a bit of fight or flight, because it felt like I was going into a similar environment where there was just so much to do, working across time zones. So that time it came on a lot quicker, a lot harder, but I came out the other side faster, because I realized what was happening. And it was actually that second experience that made me realize now that the earliest warning sign for me is my right eye starts flickering.
Oh, interesting.
So if that ever happens now, I know I just need a break, even though it might not be obvious what the stressor is. I need some time away from my desk just to look after myself and then rebalance.
So good to, I mean, that's a common, I mean, there's many things that can be, so many things can cause that, but it's a common thing when people are just plain tired even. And I'll, say to people, oh, your eye is, and they're like, really? And they don't even notice that it's happening.
Yeah.
And did you have any, one of the things I'm really interested in is psychoneuroendocrinology, the idea that our endocrine system and our psychology are not just the idea, the study of them being so linked. Did anyone, or did you have any kind of testing for like adrenal fatigue or anything like that? Or was it just kind of a psychiatrist and you were on your own?
Yeah, so no, there was nothing like that. And when I think back to round one of burnout with me, burnout wasn't even recognized. It wasn't really part of the lingo in those days. The World Health Organization, I think, recognized it in 2019. So at the time, they were talking to me in terms of anxiety and depression. And I could see there were elements of that in what I was experiencing, but it didn't really sum up the whole experience. So there was no blood work or any of that done. It was seeing a psychiatrist. They recommended going on medication and then cognitive behavior therapy. So it was great that I had that support, but there were just so many gaps in the recovery process for me, and basically I've ended up building a business to bridge those gaps, because I was like, you need that person who can show you there's life out the other side of this, and who's helping you understand why it happened and to do the behavior change work. But that just wasn't part of the support ecosystem at that time.
And it's so, that's what I love about being an entrepreneur, is we get to really see, the things that and that have and have not worked for us, and continue to shift and shape our systems or services around that. So I love that you took this experience and really made it I know your goal is to defeat burnout as the title of your business. What would you say? I mean, one of the things that I like about habit building is that I say, just simply, even though we know from a quantum field that observation does change the thing that you're observing, but I always say to clients, best as you can, simply observe before making any changes, so that we can really get a sense. But for a lot of people, either they don't have that kind of sort of skill even to observe themselves. That's just not sort of part of their bailiwick, right? Or they become very anxious and judgmental upon self-observation.
Yeah.
And so it can be very hard. I think what's so cool about being a coach specializing in this one exact thing that you're doing, that you can really help people pinpoint. How do you work with your clients on defeating their burnout and choosing a new path?
Yeah, so everyone's different. I've over the course of my recovery, basically anything that helped me, I've got trained in. So I have this interesting mixture of being trained as a coach, hypnotherapist, also some therapy skills. And I find that depending on the client, I will major in one of those elements. And mentorship is also a thing. So typically the work that we do together will start off by making sure they understand what's happened and quickly get into the why. So looking at what were the environmental factors that led to burnout, and also what were the personal habits, character traits that also contributed to the situation. And I find that that insight is just so freeing, because before you have that, you just feel like you're in this, you feel so different and you just don't know why. But there's actually often very good reasons that are a mix of the environment that you're in and your personality coming together in a perfect storm. And then obviously there's work to do around habit change to make sure that you're looking after yourself. But where the work gets really interesting is I find it's that opportunity to have a complete reset, discover who you are and actually what you want. Because so many people like me kind of sleepwalked into a career, have got to a certain level, or built a business, and they're actually not enjoying it anymore, or it's become something that they didn't originally intend it to. So using it as a complete reset to decide what they want. So some of my clients leave the corporate world, build businesses, or just have different careers, but from the basis of this is the environment that I want to be in, and this is who I authentically am. And the two of those work really well together. What typically doesn't work is going back into the same environment, not changing anything for you.
Sure. Yeah. You know, one of my friends is British, and he has that traditional kind of dry British humor, as they say. And one of the things he said to me one time, jokingly, but I think in a certain critique kind of way, is he said, "You Americans are just obsessed with happiness," and he's like, "And I don't think it does you any good, you know." Um, and he works for the military or something, so it's just not his vibe of going for how things feel and that kind of thing. But I do think it's he's not the only one to say that Americans are very happiness focused. And but given what we were talking about earlier, even that the World Health Organization had not recognized burnout as a thing, and in certain ways, I do see that while I find the British have wonderful manners, at least on the outside, right? That yeah, the kind of this personal development kind of thing is more of a newer, if I'm not mistaken, or at least a newer accepted thing in the
Yeah,
UK.
we're definitely behind the States with that. Like, for example, most of the courses I've been through, certifications have been run out of America, 100%.
Mm-hmm. So how do you are most of your clients, where are your clients? Do you have clients in the UK, or are they more based in the
It's balanced between Australia, mainland Europe, UK, and US. Actually, it's really interested me that it's gone straight into a global audience. And in fact, it was kind of UK is steadily growing now, but the initial demand was definitely from the States.
Uh-huh. So sort of the people who are already aware of this kind of work more, that maybe in their environment. And so do you find a difference for people in, let's say, mainland Europe, in terms of, the things that you're talking about, of pausing and resetting and saying, well, what do you actually want to do in your life? Do you see a difference in the different areas in the world of people's willingness, awareness on that particular topic?
Not hugely so far. I seem to attract the people who are similar to me, and they're
Sure.
quite open to that conversation, because there's almost a sense of something this painful needs to mean something. So I'm going to decide that it means that it's the opportunity to make this the best chapter of my life yet.
Mm. And how do people find you? I know on social media you've talked about that, but do people have any kind of, it sounds like you didn't really have support in, at least when you were in corporate, you didn't really have anyone watching over you to say, "Hey, Emma, you don't seem well." It,
No, it was more kind of, it's 10 p.m. and, oh, can we have this for tomorrow?
oh my gosh, I
Yeah.
literally can't imagine. But um, so how do people, is it just that they're on social media and they find you, or are corporations starting to provide? I know, I have executive coach clients where corporations are, at least some, on the lookout for this kind of thing, because obviously it's not great. You had that experience and you left and they lost an incredibly valuable employee. So yeah, how are people finding you, and what are corporations doing to prevent this themselves?
Yeah, so definitely there's increased awareness from corporate. So I get called on to do training sessions and some coaching of kind of middle to senior people. So there's definitely a growing awareness that this is not just an individual thing, there's a cultural piece to it as well, which is great. Randomly, companies have been reaching out to me after seeing videos on TikTok, which really fascinated me. I always thought it would be my LinkedIn posting that attracted that kind of corporate, but they've said there's actually something quite nice about seeing a real person talking about their own experiences rather than actually looking for the company that delivers
Mm,
this. And when I think back to what could have helped me prevent burnout, actually hearing someone that I respected as having a senior career and being good at what they do, saying, this is what happened to me,
mm,
I would have taken notice of that.
mm. And what would you, I know it's your goal, sort of from a public health and from your own experience, goal of yours to, as your company says, defeat burnout. What would you say, both on the personal level and on the corporate level, for people and companies who really do want to do a better job, but they may not be in a position to work with a coach or hire a mentor, or what would you say, just kind of one or two tips of, maybe they have stomach aches, but they kind of always had stomach aches, so they don't put it, what would you say, things to both to be on the lookout for, as well as things to implement to really evade the path that you went down?
Yeah. So if I think of kind of the company ecosystem, if I was to give it in a soundbite, it's literally being human. So as humans, we do have intuition and empathy, and we know when things are wrong quite often, but somehow when people are in a corporation, that side of things gets switched off and we go into business mode.
Mm,
Actually, if more people in corporates were just showing up as their real authentic human, having conversations with the team about how people really are, especially when they feel like they're too busy to have conversations,
mm,
that would go a huge way. Because a lot of this builds up because people are not having conversations about what's going on, or they're raising things and nothing changes as a result. So um yeah, it's just realizing that people are humans, and if you truly want to have a long-term relationship with them, you've got to make sure that you're working in a way that's sustainable. And I see so many individuals and companies, I was guilty of this, of working as if I'm on a project that's finite, so I can just go hell for leather and then assume there's going to be a break in that, but the break never comes.
mm,
So really thinking about, if we continue like this for months, years, is that sustainable? Is a good question to ask. I think had you asked me that back in just 2017, I'd have had that acknowledgement that actually there was no way that I could continue working like that.
yeah. And it's interesting that no one, there, that was nowhere in the protocol to even say, hey, is 20 hours a day
Yeah.
sustainable, since it so obviously isn't, yet there's so many things of you hear of, especially younger people, but not limited to, of people working 16, 20, it's just um and so for back to sort of the concept of the culture, not necessarily limited to the UK, but that culture, when the awareness isn't there as part of, when it's not part of the fabric of the corporate culture. So you said, for example, people are raising things of their humanity, but nothing is happening. What would be a simple way that you would recommend for people to kind of implement, or for corporations to implement something as an outlet or as a support for people's actual humanity when they do have the courage to bring something forward, but they kind of, no one knows what to do once they have?
Yeah, that's a really tough one. And I'd say just talking to the individual in that situation, you have to be entirely selfish about your health. The reality is, if you're working in an environment that's not going to change, you need to ask some big questions around whether you still want to be there, because there's lots of things that we can do as coping strategies, but they take a toll when you're in an environment, if they essentially don't care enough to change anything about workload, or I mean there's lots of environmental factors that can lead to burnout. But let's say it's a company that, I don't know, they're just not quite sure how to change. I would say bring in a specialist, because yes, there's an upfront investment, but it is tiny in comparison to the cost that you'll incur losing talent, loss of productivity, people off sick, hiring costs. It's literally a drop in an ocean. And one of the things that concerns me is there's lots of processes around underperformance in companies. They've got a great process there. No one seems to have the thought process around their high achievers, their overachievers, and how to make that sustainable. They get taken for granted because Emma's always been able to do everything.
Yeah.
So why would that change? There's not that thought process around, okay, if we're overly relying on that person, how do we over support them in that
Mm.
process as well? So
Wow,
yeah,
that's brilliant. I love that. I've never heard that term, over support. I love that
I
that
think I
idea.
just made it up.
It's brilliant. Emma, thank you so much. Emma Matthews of defeatburnout.com. Thank you so much for taking this time to share your wisdom and your personal experience and your tips and your observations of what, is possible for a world that I think is very in the mode of, the kind of what did they say, that barreling toward burnout, and seeing that we can really do it a different way. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me, Leah.
All right. Well, this concludes this episode of High Performance Habit and Business Building. I have been your host, Leah Fish, speaking with Emma Matthews of defeatburnout.com, and we will see you next time. Thanks for listening.